Welcome to R2-3D, my name is Alan, and in this week's video I'll be wrapping up the Bulkamancer Street Fighter duo with this iconic Chun-Li figure. In this video I'll take you through the painting process, show you how to install some cool LEDs, and if you stick around till the very end, how to get your own awesome bonus piece for your own display cabinet. Alright. I printed all the parts off in my GK3 Ultra using Funky standard resins. A huge shout out to Bulkamancer for the pre-supports. They pop off really cleanly, which you'll appreciate because this kit has a ton of pieces. With around 40 individual parts fully prepped, the next step was priming them. I started with a coat of colloidal black primer and then applied a top-down Zenithal using their white primer to establish the light source. When you're painting with lighting in mind, you're essentially imagining how the model would look under a single point of light like the sun. The goal is to let your highlights hit where the light naturally falls, while leaving shadows in the recesses where it wouldn't reach. To capture Chun-Li's pale skin tone, I selected a light pink by Vallejo. I worked it in very thin controlled passes, building up the colour gradually over the Zenithal to keep the shadows intact whilst adding warmth to the highlighted areas. For the shadowy areas of her skin, I used Pro Acryl's transparent red. By applying it in thin overlapping layers with the light pink, I was able to create smooth transitions whilst carving out the musculature and enhancing the body definition on her arms and legs. This technique involves painting red directly back into the shadowy areas, creating rich, saturated undertones that will deepen the overall skin palette. To kick off the skin tones, I use Vallejo's Salmon Rose. This particular shade adds a wonderful warmth to her complexion and gives a fantastic base to build upon. Again, the key here is to apply in thin layers so you can slowly build up the coverage without completely overpowering those underlayers. If you slap on too much paint all at once, you'll lose that fantastic richness and the depth that the undertones give you. For the first shadow tone, I went with Vallejo's German Orange. Don't let the name fool you, it's actually a wonderful slightly orangey pink skin shade that works brilliantly for Chun-Li. I'm applying it directly into the shadowy areas to really help carve out and help define her physique. Next up, I brought in some Pale Flesh by Vallejo for the highlights. It's a gorgeous ultralight skin tone that works really well on all the areas that catch the light the most, like the tops of her arms, legs, as well as her forehead and the cheeks of her face. And it wouldn't be a proper skin tone without some Orchis Dermis thrown into the mix somewhere. I'm airbrushing this into all the deepest shadowy areas to help push the contrast and make those highlights really pop. If you don't have Orchis Dermis in your paint collection, don't worry, a mix of German Orange with a tiny dab of red works just as well. And to lock everything in, I hit all the skin parts with a layer of Vallejo's Satin Varnish. It's a great way to seal all the paint and helps protect the model from handling wear and tear and also from dirt and dust. Now this is the part I was really dreading the most, painting Chun-Li's tights. I was genuinely thrilled with how her legs turned out with the skin tones, which made it extra nerve-wracking to cover them up. Since she wears a pair of dark brown tights, I had to slowly build up the colour by glazing Citadel's Guilliman Flesh, which is a rich brown shade, right over her legs. And of course the best part of that was to make sure that both legs got an even application so that they both looked the same. Next up were those massive spike bangles that she wears on her wrists. I started by base coating the entire piece with tungsten steel, and then later on I will give them a coating of Vallejo black over the non-spiky parts. And I painted in her fingernails using Army Paint's Agate Skin, which is just a slightly darker shade of pink than her hands are. For our boots I used Vallejo's Off-White. You generally want to avoid pure white for stuff like this because it can look a bit too stark and unnatural, plus it leaves you no room to push your highlights any brighter if you need to. And to shade the boots, I use Citadel's Apothecary White. It's actually a gorgeous subtle grey contrast paint that works absolute wonders for getting into those recessed areas without overpowering the off-white base. I gave the table that Chun-Li stands on a base colour of Army Paint's Mournfang Brown. I applied this from above but also oversprayed it onto the shadowy areas to give me a more gradual fade out to the dark side. As that man once said, it's a very powerful force. To really darken down the shadows on the table and give it some serious depth, I'm actually using a two-step shade technique. First, I airbrushed Citadel's Carabog Crimson over the main table, the plates and the smaller tables, and then I followed that up with a layer of Agrax Earthshade, specifically on the main table to drive those shadows even deeper. And to bring out the highlights in the table, I dry brushed the edges and the wear parts with Army Paint's Mocha Skin with a very dry brush. For the main body of Chun-Li's outfit, I laid down Citadel's Talassar Blue as its base. It's a fantastic contrast paint that lets all those underlying highlights and shadows naturally shape the final look. And to push the contrast even further, I shaded the recesses with Citadel's Drakenhof Nightshade, which really makes the darker areas pop against the brighter blues. And for the band that goes around Chun-Li's waist, I actually used a mixture of Army Paint's Brigade Grey and Ash Grey. Now for the arduous task of painting all that gold piping around Chun-Li's outfit. For this I use my favourite Decacolour Gold, which is my absolute go-to for gold detailing. Just a quick heads up if you use it though, you have to work pretty fast because it tends to thicken up and turn into a custard-like gloopy mess on your palette. So you'll either have to keep refreshing it or clean it off and squeeze a new batch from the pen, but as it works so well, this is the stuff I always use. And for our hair buttons, I used the same colour combo of Brigade and Ash Grey as their waistband, and then highlighted the edge parts with Decacolour Gold. And honestly, there was only ever going to be one colour choice for Chun-Li's lucky cat, Decacolour Gold to the rescue once more. I was super happy with how the brushwork turned out here, but fair warning, try running this through an airbrush is an absolute pain. It's really tough to get a consistent spray, and a little figurine like this cat would take way too much effort to coat that way. Painting the second cat proved to be a much simpler process however. I began by applying a solid base coat of Kaleido Primer Black, followed by a gradual layer of Citadel's Talassar Blue, which gave it a nice tint over the dark foundation. And to finish up the cat's features, I blocked out the teeth and the eyes with a base layer of Army Painter's Brigade Grey. I then layered Citadel's Phalanx Yellow right over the eyes and added a tiny dab of black for the pupils, and just like that the cat is done. For the cushions, I laid down a solid base of Citadel's Leviathan Purple and let them dry. Then for one of the mini serving plates I used a vibrant mix of Vallejo's Orange Fire and Bloody Red. The noodles got a coat of Army Painter's Flickering Flame Orange, and to finish it all off I added some fine gold detailing to the flowers in the red plate using Decacolour Gold. For the pancakes I used Army Painter's Brain Matter Beige and then painted another little food item, looks like some kind of egg, with Sunset Orange. And man, after painting all these chopsticks with Tree Ancient Brown, is anyone else feeling completely starved right now, or is it just me? Anyway, back to it. The pork got a solid coat of Salmon Rose and I used a hint of Orcish Dermis on the heel of another part. To wrap things up for this batch, I gave the noodles a wash with thinned down Reikland Flesh Shade to punch up the contrast, and I painted the seaweed wraps with using Vallejo's Intermediate Green. To wrap up all the food details, I painted the spilled soup with Vallejo's Yellow Green and then gave it a light glaze of Citadel's Tesseract Glow Green to give it some awesome radioactive look and pop. Moving on to the dishware, I painted the food plates with a rich mahogany brown. For the soup bowls, I laid down a clean layer of off-white as a base for them to get ready for the next steps. Back to Chun-Li's face now, and I gave her a subtle blush using Sunset Orange by Vallejo. I topped it off with the final highlight of Pale Flesh, and then it came time to tackle the eyebrows. I used Vallejo's dark brown RLM 61, along with my absolute favourite ultra-fine nail art brushes from Amazon. Seriously, they only cost about $6 and they're an absolute game changer for eyes and brows. I painted the eyelashes and then shaded the eyeshadow areas using Citadel's Reikland Flesh Shade. I thought about using the airbrush for this part, but my aim really isn't that good for this kind of thing, so I felt much better and more comfortable doing it by hand with a paintbrush and some thinned down paints. For the whites of Chun-Li's eyes, I used Vallejo's Off-White. Thankfully, her sculpt has these gorgeous large eyes, which makes the adding detail way easier. Always a huge plus. For her lips, I mixed up a thinned down blend of Citadel's Fugan Orange and Bal Red. Then I headed back to the eyes to block out the outer iris using the exact same brown I used for the eyebrows, and to finish off the inner part with a bright pop of Vallejo's Orange Fire. To wrap up the eyes, I added a quick dab of black for the pupils, then used a little watered down Reikland Flesh Shade in the corners and along the lower lid to really help define them. Finally, I placed a specular highlight right on each eye and then a tiny dot of a secondary highlight to bring them to life. For her hair, I used the same Vallejo dark brown RLM 61 that I used for the eyebrows. Finally, I sealed the eyes with a layer of gloss varnish to help create a realistic reflective wet finish. And to finish off her accessories, I painted her earrings with Decacolour Gold. I then turned my attention back to the table bases. Painting like this, jumping back and forth between different areas, is just how I work. It's just how inspiration strikes you, and it's just everybody is different. For the bowls, I painted two of them in a sleek tungsten steel and left the third one white. Trust me, you'll see why later. For the broth inside, I used Vallejo Scrofulous Brown. I then finally switched over to the base and started building that cool mottled texture around the bottom. To do this, I grabbed an ordinary dishwashing sponge, cut it into small chunks, and then dabbed Vallejo Metallic Black all around the lower base. I used the cleaner part of the sponge to mop up any large bubbles or heavy paint blobs. After that, I built up the texture using Deep Grey by Army Paints, followed by Plate Mail Metal, and then finally a Vallejo Steel, all applied in the exact same manner. To add a little extra framing and detail, I painted two crisp rings around the edge of the base using Kaleido's Black Primer. And then, it was back to that gold again. This has got to be the absolute record holder for the project I've used the most gold on, hands down. And I've sped this part up quite a bit as this took absolutely ages to do. And speaking of projects that take absolutely ages, oh boy, these cushions, my eyes. Painting these things took absolutely ages, all the flowers and vines, but hey, pull up a chair and fill your boots. I'm actually going to whip up a quick 3D model while you sit back and watch this painstaking art unfold. And just when you thought it was finally done, another round of intricate detailing. This time it's the single white soup bowl we set aside earlier. I absolutely love how the finished product looks, but geesh, these tiny little details are so tricky to paint. Now back to the lantern that adorns the base. I painted the frame using an Army Painter Grey Castle, and for a cool feature I actually printed the middle section in clear resin so it can be lit up from the inside. I ran a single yellow LED up through the lantern column and held it in place with a piece of packaging foam I got recently. The LED comes pre-wired with a resistor, so all you have to do is hook it up to a power source. You could use a watch battery in a holder, but I went for a power supply so I can reuse it for future projects. Once everything is painted, wired and glued together, it's officially done. So, if you want to take your own Street Fighter duo to the next level, why not join my Patreon and grab your exclusive file that I made just for this build? Also, click that sub button and leave a comment in the commenty bit. Thanks for watching. This has been R2-3D, and I'll see you in the next one.
Fight! Fight!